A week went by before we contacted John Coop early in May after I won Miss Rodeo Swift Current. He was a local horse buyer, and you guessed it, my dad knew him too. Well, my parents knew John and his wife Mary and their sons. John bought, traded, rode, and sold many horses over his lifetime. John and his wife Mary invited us over to discuss a few options in regards to this horse he had donated to the winner of the contest. My dad was working, so Mum took me out to Coop's farm in Blumenort. John and Mary are a wonderful couple and invited us in with great warmth and friendship. We sat down at their table and visited over a cup of coffee. John leaned onto the table toward me, looked me right in the eyes, and said that he is going to let me choose one of 3 horses, that I did not necessarily have to take the Paint Filly. My choices were 2-year-old Paint Filly unregistered, or one of 2 registered sorrel yearling quarter horse colts. He had the registration papers right there and pushed them in front of me to look at. I scanned over the papers, and both colts were well bred as far as quarter horse breeding goes. My choice of colt would be gelded anyway. John must have been reading my mind because he said maybe it would help to make a decision if we went and looked at the horses. We put our boots and jackets back on because it was still cool in early May and went out to his corrals behind the house to look at the horses. He had the filly separate from the colts, and at the time I don't recall seeing any other horses there. The filly was quieter than the colts because John had spent more time with her, but she was on the small side for a 2-year-old. She was mostly white, plus she was of unknown breeding. The 2 yearling colts were robust and lively. The one colt stood out to me more than the other. His sorrel coloring was a darker, richer red, and he had one short half sock on his hind leg. John informed me that the colt's registered name was Dream Boy 1. Well, that settles it then. That's the one I want. John said he would deliver him to me the next time he was coming into Swift Current, which would be later that week. Dream Boy 1 was delivered as promised, and I had another future prospect to work with. He blossomed and grew over the summer and was a beautiful-looking yearling. I couldn't call him any part of his registered name that would sound good, so his bright red coloring was the result of the name I gave him, which was simply Red. Raisin was my favorite riding horse, and Toby was the spare horse that anyone could ride, and they did. We have tons of photos of nearly everyone on Toby. Both of my grandmas rode Toby, even if it was for a short ride, just to get a picture. My friends, my parents' friends, any family member that came from near and far away, you name it, I took any visitors riding that indicated they would like to be on a horse. Each time I took someone riding, especially if they were from far away and only came once in a while, Mum would get her camera out and take a picture. I took so many people riding every spring, summer, and fall each year that I couldn't begin to count them all. Fury was now 2, was gorgeous, and had the sweetest temperament you could ever expect from a young stallion. He was most respectful online at all times, under any and all circumstances, even if the mares were in season. Fury bred only 1 mare that spring, the black quarter horse mare that Mum and I bought at a local auction sale the fall before as a yearling. She was a registered filly of Two-Eyed Jack breeding. She went cheap, so we bought her. Mum and I were banned from going to auctions after that. Her registered name was My Fair Devil. Who names their horse this on purpose? We just called her Beauty. I didn't start her under saddle because she was bred to Fury to foal the following spring. I played with Fury out in the little pasture we had for him, and he was always so sweet. It was easy to jump on him bareback because he wasn't really tall, and it wasn't long before I was able to ride him around his paddock at a walk and trot. What I did notice about Fury was that his sides were extremely sensitive, and it didn't take much leg pressure to get him to move forward or off your leg. It was just as well that I now had an excellent bareback seat and could ride with very minimal squeezing of my legs to stay on the horse as he moved. My lower legs could just drape over Fury's sides loosely, and I could hang on with minimal thigh pressure if necessary. I was told that I made it all look so easy. I must thank Toby for teaching me my bareback seat, as any other horse I rode was so smooth in comparison to him, and therefore easy to ride bareback. I rode Fury some of the time. We even got a saddle on him that summer, and then my dad thought that perhaps he should ride him. Oh boy, bad idea. There was nothing I could do to dissuade my dad from riding Fury. He had his mind set, and that was it. My mom went and helped my dad saddle Fury up, and there were photos taken of this particular ride. Roni took them. The saddling, the getting on, the mad gallop down the field, the sharp turn that left my dad lying on his back, gasping for air, and my favorite, the blurry close-up one of my dad lying on his back with his hat lying beside his head with that pained expression on his face. I told you not to ride him. He wasn't ready. It didn't help that Fury was small. He matured at 14 hands high, and that my dad was tall and lean, 6'4" and 160 pounds. My dad could have wrapped his long legs all the way around Fury's girth if he wanted to, but that quick little horse could duck out from underneath that tall, skinny guy any day of the week. Fury was not my dad's preferred mount, and he never successfully completed one full ride on Fury. My mom only rode Fury once. He was supposed to be her horse, and I only have one photo to mark that occasion. Fury went to British Columbia to the mountains that fall, but the cousins who wanted him so badly never paid for him, and 9 months later he came back to the farm to stay. That summer I rode in the Canada Day Parade. Donna rode with me on Sheba. We always had so much fun riding together, and that summer was no exception. We knew this farmer that lived about 6 miles south of us. My mom and dad knew them, and they had foster kids at their house all the time. This farmer stopped by one day with a teenage foster boy in tow to ask my dad about some equipment. Donna and I were out riding in the yard, and this boy started telling us about this horse that they bought at a local sale and how fast this horse was. He invited us to ride over there one day. It rained for a few days and was quite muddy out. On an overcast day, shortly after it stopped raining, Donna and I went out for a ride. We had ridden to the other side of the Black Bridge and decided it would be a good day to ride to that farmer's place further south and go check out this new horse they bought. We rode down the road ditches until we got to their farm. The day was still cloudy and cool. We wore our jean jackets. The boy we had seen at the farm a few days before came out and went and got his new gelding to show us. The gelding was dark sorrel with only a little white on his face and 1 or 2 white socks. What I remember about this horse was that he was in really good condition and was a muscular quarter horse. I think he must have been recently gelded because he had a fairly thick throat latch which looked funny to me. He stood about 15 hands high, and the boy called him Cimarron or something like that. We went and rode out in the ditch for a while. The teenage boy was getting cocky with us girls and wanted to show off. He challenged us to a match race. On occasion we would race just for the fun of it. I can't say now for sure which horse was faster if Donna and I raced. Raisin was pretty fast, and I knew Sheba was fast too. I think Sheba might have beat Raisin on dry footing if I were to be honest. The boy said there was a summer fallow field out behind the house that we should race there. We rode to the designated field. We lined up, 3 of us abreast, and shouted in unison, "On your marks, get set, go!" Then we let our horses run like the wind. The cultivated dirt field was muddy, really muddy, and the horses ran. Donna and I both hissed in our horses' ears, and they ran faster yet. Only 10 strides into the race, Raisin started pulling ahead, and we kept running faster and faster. The mud flew 20 feet into the air and far behind us, and when I looked behind me, the boy on the supposed fast horse and my friend were far behind me, eating Raisin's mud. Sheba was slightly faster than the Cinnamon, on the deep slippery surface, but Raisin was by far superior for racing in the muddy field. Raisin had won. I pulled him up and rode back toward Donna and the boy with a huge grin pasted on my face. "Wow, that's quite some horse you have there," was all he said to me. I patted Raisin's neck and just said, "He's the best." Donna and I walked our horses back with the boy to the farm, and before we left, Donna said, "We should do that again sometime on dry ground." Then we started the hour-and-a-half ride back home. I felt bad for my friend that she had some mud on her. It wasn't nearly as much as that boy, though, and we laughed about that. Donna said when Raisin pulled ahead and really started pelting the mud, she had pulled Sheba up, and on any other day she would have given me a run for my money. Not that we were betting or anything. I smiled. It was a great summer of riding with my friends. That fall I started high school. Winter brought lots of snow and cold days, putting livestock in the barn, chores twice a day, barn and tack cleaning, and more. It was mine and Chad's responsibility to do chores morning and night on the weekends and evening during the week. Donna and I spent a lot of time together too because she owns Sheba now, and we had some crazy rides in the winter too. One warmer wintry afternoon, we saddled up Raisin and Sheba, who were madly in love with each other, and decided we would ride toward town in the wind, which was coming from the north. That way we could turn around at the top of the big hill, which was 1.25 miles, and ride home with the wind at our backs. We were dumb teenagers then. We wore long underwear under our jeans, but just winter jackets, a toque, and gloves, and that was it. It was -15 Celsius without wind chill factored into that equation. My mom drove into town to get something, so she passed us as we were riding toward town. Donna and I had an enjoyable ride all the way to the top of the big hill. We were not in a big hurry, but we were pretty cold when we got turned around. It was 1.25 miles ride back home to the warmth of the barn. No sooner had we turned around, not even halfway back down the hill toward home, when the wind switched direction and came straight out of the south. We were already popsicles, and now we had the wind in our faces again. By then we were shivering so bad that we just looked at each other, removed our feet from the stirrups, and promptly turned around in the saddles as our horses were still walking, giggling now because our horses would go home and we could ride with the wind to our backs. It wasn't a big deal. The horses walked and didn't try to trot off on us. It didn't matter to them if we were backward in the saddle. About 2/3 of the way down the road is a short curved hill. We had just ridden down the curve when we saw my mom's brown and white Chevrolet Blazer coming back home. We saw Mom's vehicle right away because that's the way we were facing. Mom slowed down when she saw us, and she stopped and rolled the window down. We smiled and said hi. My mom started lecturing us about how unsafe it was for us to sit on our horses like that. "You girls get sitting proper in those saddles right now." Holy cow, Mom! We promptly turned properly in the saddles, and my mom sped off. It wasn't far to home, but once Mom was out of sight, we turned around in the saddles again until we got to the end of the laneway. It seemed to take forever to thaw out after we put our horses away. We always dressed warmer or rode on warmer winter days after that. In March 1985, we had a 2-day blizzard that dumped more than 2 feet of snow on us and made road travel difficult. If you didn't own a 4-wheel drive, you were not going anywhere for a few days. Once the storm was over, it leaned toward a warming trend and looked as though we were going to get some warmer days to melt all that snow. On the evening of March 23rd, it was calm. The storm was over. Chad and I were out feeding the livestock like we did every day. It was the Saturday, and I was hoping Mom would take me into Donna's later that evening. Raisin and Red stood at the barn door and when I opened it with their grain. I walked past them to go put their grain in the feeder in the middle of the corral. I don't know what got into them, but they started running and bolted past me. When they did, Red kicked out and his hoof caught me right in the head. I was only unconscious for maybe a second or two, but I came to, sitting on the ground, looking down at a pool of bright red blood in the snow, holding my gloved hand over my eye. I looked up and saw Chad climbing the fence, and I yelled at him to go get Mom. I must have got up and started walking toward the barn door, because when I got to the barn door, my mom was already there holding a wad of paper towel and clean towels. I moved my hand away from my left eye, and Mom covered it with the paper towel and towels, put my hand back to cover the towels, took my arm, and said, "Let's go." I remember being cold, and the ride to the hospital was bumpy. I felt every little movement. My head hurt. Oh, my head hurt. I was freezing, and then they were taking my clothes off. They put a warm blanket on me, but I shivered uncontrollably. I swore at everybody that bumped the stretcher. I couldn't see. They wouldn't let me look. X-rays, freezing cold tables, and bumping the stretcher, and then the needle in the corner of my eye to freeze the skin so they could sew up the gaping wound in the corner of my eye and on my eyelid. They couldn't put me to sleep because I had a head injury, someone said. Finally, they gave me a shot of pain reliever in my butt, and that hurt too. A dark room was welcome, and somewhere the pain subsided long enough that I could fall asleep. I didn't throw up until the next morning. When you have a head injury, the last thing you want to do is throw up. They woke me up every hour to see if I was still coherent and not brain damaged, I guess. Mom was there early in the morning. The doctor, I was told, was the eye specialist in town, and he had sewn up my eye. I had a padded white patch on my eye. I suffered a concussion, but there were no broken bones on my face, not my nose, cheek, or eyebrow was broken. But I had suffered severe pressure to my eyeball, and it took 49 tiny stitches to close up the wound around my eye. The eye doctor was sympathetic to a 15-year-old girl with a horrible head and eye injury, and he had tried his very best to sew it as good as a plastic surgeon so that I would have minimal scarring. I don't remember much of the people that came to see me in the hospital or the cards or flowers they brought. I just wanted to go home with my throbbing head. On the second day at the hospital, the eye doctor came and looked into my eye. He had quite a time opening my swollen eyelid to have a look at the eyeball. He said that my retina was split and that I had only been a tiny bit of pressure more away from having my eyeball explode and losing it forever. My vision on that eye would be blind in the center, and I might have some peripheral vision. He allowed me to look in the mirror. Thanks, Mom, this one time for not taking a picture. Wednesday at noon, I was released from the hospital and allowed to go home. I was not to do any type of physical activity for at least 2 weeks, 10 days until the stitches came out. Drops and salve in my eye twice a day, one to keep my pupil dilated and the other for infection. That evening, who should phone me but John Coop. He called to ask me if I would be interested in working with the yearling colt that he was donating to the Rodeo Queen contest that year. I told him that I would love to, but I had just got home from the hospital, and then I told him what had happened. John felt so bad. There wasn't really anything he could have done to prevent it. He offered to take Red back and pay me for him, and I agreed to that. I missed 2 weeks of school that spring. The headache remained for weeks. It would subside with pain relievers, but that was the best I could hope for at the time. 10 days after the accident, I got the stitches removed. Most of the swelling was gone, but I still had a black eye. My pupil was dilated as big as my iris, so I had one black eye and one blue eye. It was hideous to look at, and I had to wear dark sunglasses to protect my eye while it was in that state, or the light would damage it further. The worst part about my eye was that the pressure to my eyeball had pulled and sprung back some of the muscles and ligaments that hold your eye straight. So my left eye went out. I felt horribly ugly with my eye like that. John brought the yearling for me to work with and brush up, loaded Red in the trailer, and paid me $300 cash for him. I joked about that, saying that $300 for red was better than a kick in the head, and I got that too. I went back to school with my sunglasses on. It was really hard to concentrate. My headache would not totally go away. I couldn't participate in sports I liked anymore, or physical education at school for that matter. I was failing some of my classes, so was transferred to the modified version, which I was able to pass. Now about that crooked eye. Fortunately, I had a wonderful grandmother, my mom's mom. I called her Großmama because she spoke Low German. Now, she had a special gift for healing people. It was similar to a cross between a chiropractor and a massage therapist, but different. She would massage and move your arms and body around gently until things just went back where they were supposed to be and it felt better and you healed whatever was injured. Großmama was amazing. Anyway, when my eye healed enough, Großmama would gently work around my eye with her fingers, pushing the eyeball back the way it was supposed to be, over my eyelid, of course, and with her gentle ministrations, she was able to eventually get my eye so that it looked straight, just like my other eye. The only thing was that if my eye was tired and I was trying too hard to look at something, it would wander off, and then I would have to blink it back straight. Over the years, my eye strengthened enough that no one knows that I have a blind spot in my left eye or that I was ever kicked in the head by a horse. My eye doesn't wander off anymore either, thanks to Großmama and her healing hands. 3 weeks and 3 days later, I got on a horse, and luckily the rodeo wasn't until the first few days of May that year. I had 2 weeks to get ready for the rodeo. The first ride on Raisin was only a short one, and Raisin walked real careful like he knew he had to take care of me. My head still hurt with every step he took. I did not ride alone. Donna rode Sheba and came with me. I waited another 2 or 3 days before I tried to go out again. Each time we went out for a ride, it was a little longer, but not faster. I did not lope until the rodeo, but was so thankful that I could get Raisin to slow lope from a walk with just a kiss. Donna won Miss Rodeo Swift Current 1985, and the colt that year, Two-Eyed Marshall, had already made himself at home at the farm and was welcomed back. Donna presented Marshall, along with his registration papers, to my dad for Sheba's board. Beauty later gave birth to a sorrel colt with a blaze, which was a huge disappointment to me. Black and black is not supposed to make red. My family and I witnessed the birth of the colt, which was a miracle. I did my 5-minute speech in English class on the birth of a foal with photos and got 89%. I sold Beauty. Her colt I named Mighty, and he came back to the farm at weaning time because the buyer didn't want the crossbred colt. Now that I was 16, I could take the driver's test to get my license. I had taken a course the first semester of grade 10. I failed my first driver's test and passed the second one 2 weeks later. I could legally drive now. My dad helped me buy my first car, a 210 Datsun two-door car with a standard 4-speed transmission. Right after I got my driver's license, I did one of the dumbest things of my life. I sold Raisin. I blamed it on brain damage. I thought I could find and buy a better horse than him. I sold him at a ranch horse sale that June. We had too many horses at the time, so Dad sold Marshall at that sale too. Raisin was sold to a rancher near Val Marie, and that's all I knew. He sold for $1,800. My friends and I went to a drive-in movie that night, and I bawled the whole time. I don't know what movie we went to see. When school was out, Mom and I went to a ranch south of Consul to look at some Appaloosa geldings. They were loudly colored and had manes and tails at least. One gelding I rode I really liked, 15-hand high, gorgeous red bay coloring with a neat little blanket on his haunches, and he had a full mane and tail. He was the perfect Western pleasure horse, very well trained and mannered, a beauty to ride. I also rode another gelding that had less mane and tail, a little taller, less refined, a bump on his forehead, not too pretty, mostly brown roan coloring with splotches and a blanket. I didn't like the look of him much and wasn't too fond of the training on him. He handled okay, but not refined like the other horse. Both horses had been used on cattle and been roped off. I decided I wanted to buy the bay. But suddenly, some kid appeared out of nowhere, and he wasn't going to sell his horse, and that was final. What a disappointment. That was the horse I wanted. I don't know why I didn't keep looking, but I bought the ugly brown one, and Rocky came home with us that day. Rocky and I covered many miles, but he was never racing. He was the fastest horse I had ever ridden, though. Rocky didn't like to walk. He jigged. He would trot and lope and would run flat out, but Rocky would not walk. I am damn sure that I have great abdominal muscles because I rode Rocky for a year and he jigged everywhere. I discovered that I like horses that like to walk. One day for fun, because I knew Rocky was fast, I asked my brother Chad to ride down this road with me on his dirt bike. Chad would ride his bike on the road and I would ride in the ditch beside and get him to check his speedometer to see how fast Rocky could run. It would be a short run from the bottom of the long hill to the top, and then we would stop. At the time, I was using Dad's roping saddle. It weighed 50 pounds. A saddle pad, bridle, and brass collar, about 10 pounds more, and at the time I weighed 135 pounds. I estimated Rocky was carrying about 195 pounds. We lined up at the bottom of the selected hill, and Chad took off on his motorbike when I let Rocky go. In only a matter of strides, Rocky was flying. Chad had to go through the gears on his bike pretty fast to keep up and get beside us by the middle of the hill, and at the top we both let off the gas. I could not see for the tears in my eyes, and Rocky was still running. It took halfway down the other side of the hill for me to pull him up. By the time I got Rocky stopped, Chad was slowly making his way down the road towards us. He was always so respectful with his motorbike around the horses. He stopped his bike, placed his feet on the ground, removed his helmet, and just looked at me with his open mouth. I was waiting for something to come out of his gaping maw, but it wasn't coming. He was looking at me with that deer in the headlights look, and has no clue what to say. "How hard can it be, Chad? How fast?" I finally asked. 42, was all he said. I knew damn well his bike only read miles per hour. I let out a long, low whistle and let Rocky jig home. I guess you don't get the water running out of your eyes effect unless you are going at some speed. That was cool. Too bad I didn't know anyone with a fast horse that I could race. Rocky and I tried barrel racing and pole bending. He would get too excited and blow his leads every time. It seemed the more I tried to slow him through the pattern, the worse he got. I just enjoyed covering the miles and the scenery while riding him. I got my first horse to train that summer. Dad's friend Dale had a 2-year-old Palomino gelding he wanted started. Dale was too busy with work to start his own horse, even though he rode quite often, taking his horses either to the river hills or to Cypress Hills to ride. On occasion, he would invite me to go for a day ride, which was always great riding. Dale delivered the Palomino. His name was Trigger. The horse actually looked a lot like Roy Rogers' Trigger. He was a light Palomino in color with a blaze and 4 white socks. The resemblance was uncanny. Trigger was a tall 2-year-old gelding. He was already nearly 15 2-hands high. I gave him 1 day to settle in, so I had him in a separate pen in front of the corrals. I went out early the next morning to do chores. Oh, horse crap! My dad was going to be some upset. Trigger was not a horse. He was a beaver. He had gnawed away at the corral boards all night long, and there were wood chips all along the entire perimeter of the corral he was in. I had never seen anything like it. Sure, I had seen boards the horses had chewed on a little bit here and there, but nothing to this extent. This was an extreme case, I was sure. Fortunately, Trigger was a calm, laid-back horse, and I was riding him in no time. The more I rode him, the better he was about eating the fence. We made sure he had plenty of hay to eat to keep him busy. I don't know if he was bored or hungry, but he sure made a mess of the fence. Dale picked his horse up, and we were happy when Trigger Beaver went home. We spent a day replacing 15 2x6 fence boards because he had chewed all the way through them until they were broken remnants. I was glad he wasn't my horse. My favorite cousins that were my age came from Ontario to visit that summer, and we had so much fun horseback riding the week they were here. I made my first solo trip in my car all the way up to Smith, Alberta to visit Auntie Margaret, Uncle Mel, and my cousins. They were happy to hear I still had Toby. Dusty, Jigger, and Tony were still at their farm. I didn't remember Tony being there before. The horses were fat from being on lush pasture and no one riding them anymore. My cousins were all grown and gone except Marcel, and he didn't ride horses. I grabbed a bridle out of the shed and went to get the black horse that I thought was Dusty. I knew she was broke to ride, and I wanted to ride while I was there. The horses were so fat, and I didn't look under their tails. I mistakenly bridled and got on Tony instead of Dusty. I was wondering why Dusty was so hard to turn until I got to the house when my aunt informed me that I had the wrong horse. She laughed at me, but that was okay. I went for a bareback ride around the pasture on Tony with the two mares following us. It was an enjoyable summer afternoon, and I basked in the sun and the aroma of horses on pasture on a horse that enjoyed the attention. I was in my happy place. This was the good life. By fall, I drove to school. Mom and I went and picked up my Morgan quarter-horse weanling colt. He was not halter broke like the guy had promised, but that was taken care of at home. Fury was back at the farm. Mom and I made the long trip to British Columbia to get him too. 1986 brought positive changes in my horse world. At the indoor rodeo that spring, I ran into a gentleman rancher by the name of Ken, who rode for the PFRA, which is short for Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration. They run the community pastures all over the prairies. He was looking for a horse and was interested in my Appaloosa Rocky. Ken rode Rocky and really liked him. He had already been used for roping, so would be the perfect horse for him. He didn't want to buy him though. He had a horse that he wanted to trade me. Ken brought out this stocky 15 one-hand high Palomino registered quarter-horse gelding that he was willing to trade straight across. I rode the gelding and he was really nice to ride. Awesome gaits, well trained, easy to control, nice to look at, except for that his mane had been shaved off. I agreed to the trade. Ken left with Rocky, and Yeller was mine. Ken called him that because he figured he was yellow. His registered name was Drifter's Playboy. He looked like a Tex to me, and the Palomino got a new name. It didn't take long for the horse to know who that was when I called Tex. I didn't like the roached mane. I would let it grow out. It reminded me too much of Dan, and this summer I pulled Toby's mane out. In those first photos of Tex, he looked terrible with his roached mane and winter coat, but by late summer, he looked amazing. I liked Tex. He was a horse with a big personality. There was hardly a place for a radius of 10 miles around the farm that I hadn't ridden on horseback. My favorite place to ride was in the hills on the other side of the creek by the railroad tracks that went all the way into town. There was one coulee after another on both sides of the tracks for 3 miles. There was always wildlife to see in the hills, and when I rode there, it was like going somewhere else. Not to mention that you couldn't tell that you were only 2 miles away from the city. There was one coulee that I didn't ride to very often, but the kids that rode dirt bikes did, and it was on the one day I rode there with Tex that I rode a runaway. This is not what you are thinking is going to happen. We were calmly walking along the top of the coulee to the south of where 2 dirt bikers were ripping up the prairie grass on the hills, and we could hear them long before we saw them. As soon as Tex spied those dirt bikes moving, he bolted. He did not bolt away from the motorbikes, but took off down the hill at a dead run after the bikes. I was too dumbfounded to do anything but hang on. I was sure I was witnessing some strange phenomena. The bikes went up and down the hills, and Tex chased them, with me riding the wind. At first the bikes came back to the coulee where we first saw them, but Tex was not about to give up a good chase. I was afraid that Tex was going to get hurt, but I could not stop him without causing a wreck going full tilt through the coulee like that, so I let him have his head. The dirt bikers must have thought I was trying to stop them, so they started going back through the coulees and up onto the railroad track and booked it back to town, and it wasn't until they were far ahead that Tex finally slowed down and let me take control. Tex was in fine physical form from all the miles that I rode him all the time, but he had a good sweat on and was breathing heavy for a while as we turned around to walk back home. I asked Tex, "What the heck was that all about? What in tarnation has gotten into you?" I would laugh out loud at how crazy the whole scenario was. My horse chases motorbikes. When I got home, I had to find Chad and tell him, "You won't believe what Tex did." Sometime afterward, I met up with Ken again, and he said that Rocky was an awesome horse. He told me that he had ridden him for 6 weeks straight on the PFRA pasture, checking cows every day, all day long, and Rocky never got tired. He later sold Rocky for thousands more than what I had paid for him and went to another cowboy on PFRA pasture. Bo and Sheba were both bred to foal in the spring. Sheba was bred to a local well-known quarter horse stallion, and Bo had been hauled to Calgary to be bred to a Morgan stallion from the same farm she came from. Donna and Roni were both excited for their mares to foal in the spring. Bo had lost her first foal the year before, so we were hoping for a better outcome this year. Bo had a bay filly first. She was a cute little filly with a white star and was healthy and up nursing. Roni had not exactly paid my parents any board for keeping Bo at the farm, so she gave the bay filly to my dad. Dad was in charge of naming his new horse. All my dad could say was, "Oh, great, now we have another useless horse." And the bay filly was named Useless, and it stuck. My mom has a great snapshot of my dad kneeling beside Useless at 2 weeks of age, and she is nuzzling his ear. Sheba later had a sorrel colt, and he was named Flash because he loved to run and show off. Fury was gelded later that summer because one of the mares that came to be bred to him in the spring kicked him in the testicles and smashed one of them. The injured testicle had a higher risk of becoming cancerous, so it was best for the health of the horse to geld him. I never heard if that mare caught and had a foal sired by Fury or not. I only know of 2 foals that he sired. Mighty, of course, and Leanne's buckskin pony mare had a foal by Fury. Her name was Arrow. She was a cute little bay filly, and I never saw her after she was a yearling because Leanne sold Sandy and Arrow shortly after Arrow turned 1. Near the end of that summer, Toby went to a new home. There were 3 little boys that wanted a bomb-proof pony to learn to ride on. It was a sad day, and there were some tears as I said goodbye to my friend. I gave him a big hug and thanked him for 7 years of teaching me how to ride. I loved that pony. I knew that he would have a good home and far more attention than he was getting at our place, so I was willing to let him go. I never saw Toby in the flesh again, only a photo of him grazing in his pasture at his new home. Many years later, I met up with the gentleman that bought him, and he told me that Toby had died the summer before and was buried in his pasture. He would have been about 30 years old. I often read the classifieds in the paper just to see what horses were for sale. We were not really in the market to buy any more at the time, but I just looked for fun. In the fall, I came across an ad for a horse that seemed way too familiar. I was sure it was Raisin, and I showed my mom the ad. Mom told me to call and see if it was him. She knew how much I missed Raisin and wished that I had him back. I told her I didn't have any money to buy him back, but Mom insisted that I at least call to make sure it was him. I called the number, and the guy said that it was Raisin, but I couldn't come see him because a woman from Kyle had just picked him up to try him out for a week before deciding if she wanted to purchase him or not. My heart sunk. I had missed him. The guy gave me her name and number. I called her, but she had decided to buy Raisin. She took my name and number just in case she wanted to sell him later. Raisin was 10 that fall. I was sorely disappointed that I had missed my opportunity to buy back the best horse I ever owned. It was only a short month or two after my big disappointment when the woman called me up one day and asked me if I still wanted to buy Raisin back. Do I want to buy him back? I told her that I would like to buy him back, but I would like to come out and see him. She agreed. So Mom, Donna, and I went to her farm north of Kyle to visit Raisin. Raisin didn't look anything like the day I sold him. Mom took photos. He was thinner and had very little muscle tone. His feet were cracked and looked bad. They weren't long. You could just tell he had been on poor quality feed. I rode Raisin that day, and he went willingly for me. The woman called him Ray. He was not Ray. He was Raisin. I wondered if Raisin would remember the trick I taught him. I found a horse cookie in my pocket, leaned down toward Raisin's left front shoulder, and holding out my hand and said, "Shake." Raisin put his nose down to my hand with the cookie and lifted his left front leg to shake a hoof with me. I shook his leg and gave him the cookie and loved him up. He remembered. We told the woman we would get back to her in a day or two. It was now early November 1986. The next day she pulled into the yard at the farm with her stock trailer in tow with Raisin in it and said to my mom, "Are you going to pay for him or what?" We could not believe the audacity of this woman. Luckily, my mom had enough cash stashed away to pay her. We unloaded Raisin and put him in the corral, and that woman drove off with her $1,600 cash. The registration papers for Raisin never got transferred to her and somehow got lost in the shuffle, but it didn't matter. Raisin was home to stay.